Part 4 of The Two Sisters, written by Jeannie Tarpley Fox. All rights reserved. Copyrighted material. Illustrations by Copilot AI. During the days, Alma enjoyed napping in the dark in uninhabited, fully furnished bedrooms upstairs. In these rooms, she could not hear Viola calling her, and she knew Viola would not bother to come upstairs to find her. It was her quiet sanctuary, where she could lie on the bed she had chosen like Goldilocks exploring the empty bear's home. Curled up on her side, it was so quiet there, save for the tick of a brown wooden window pane cooling or heating in the sun, or the tuck of hands of a time-worn clock on a dresser, or a snap or a creak from the shifting hardwood floors, or the fan turning. In the blazing heat of summer, an oscillating fan moved dumbly and dutifully to and fro in the room within the old walls, pushing a breeze, repeating its hypnotic song of artificial wind into the space assigned, unknowing how it served a magical purpose for Alma. Turning a hot day into a euphoric waking dream of space and quiet, free from everything in the world save for the historic object or two. The distant corners of the room were filled with darkness, like attending sentinels, her companions that neither moved nor spoke, but only watched through the dust drifting unseen. Here, in one room or another, Alma would lay with one of the many Afghans crocheted by their grandmother. She pulled them up over her shoes and legs. There she would be, insulated from the town that had gotten so busy with its own importance as the years passed, hiding from Viola or anyone wanting this, wanting that, and safe from expectation from anybody, even the children. Don't rhyme, don't be odd, don't feel. No job for you, Alma. You're a crack nut. No suitor for you, Alma. They would want Viola instead. At these times, Alma allowed herself to lie in the semi-darkness and quiet and mood of the room, blissful with heavy eyes, and dream of Mr. Errol Flynn, whom she'd seen in the pictures. Their mother had adored Mr. Flynn and spent her own time secretly pining for him, and in turn, both Viola and Alma had loved him too. But Alma imagined that Mr. Flynn would not love Mother or Viola, but would love only her, Alma, if he only knew her, and had seen her when she was young and all of her hair was yellow. She imagined how she would entertain Mr. Flynn with songs and rhymes, and how she would show him the chickens, and how impressed he would be with her intricately twisted and woven dried flower baskets and homemade scented soaps. "How delightful, Miss Alma," he would exclaim. "You're so talented. Why, you're a darling. No wonder I love you so," he would say. These are words Viola would never hear from him. This Alma had dreamed of for years. An idea had been forming in Alma's mind for a long time. One mid-morning, after the morning chores had been completed to Viola's satisfaction, Alma felt the upper rooms of the house calling her, the shadows striking objects to make them waver and shimmer on walls and floor. Born from what light had escaped into the lower rooms, had been hypnotizing her all morning. They had moved, undulated, the shadow of a vase here, the curl of a chair back there, moving, whispering to Alma's soul. Quietly, oh so quietly, calling. Alma climbed the stairs slowly, compelled. She lifted her arms as usual, surrendering to the force that aided her up the stairs. Around the corner of the banister, she drifted down the left side of the hallway into her mother's old room. She floated, caressing the door and turning the metal brown doorknob, dented from years of use. She closed the door quietly behind her as the darkness enveloped her. Taking her pipe and some tobacco from her apron pocket, she crossed the room. There in the rocker by the window where Mother used to sit, she whipped the dark, long drapes aside for a little sunlight. Settling down into the rocker, she lit her pipe and smoked as she gazed out the window for a while, the sweet tobacco smoke curling up in the stale air of the room. As she rocked, transfixed, a dream of Mr. Errol Flynn began to grab her brain. She could almost feel his spirit in the room with her. Putting the pipe down on the sill, she went to her mother's closet and after a time pulled out their mother's wedding veil, long and yellowed with extreme age. Going to the old mirror situated atop the curved dresser, she lovingly placed the veil atop her head, and she stood staring at her reflection for a while. A time-worn face lost in the crazily moth-worn and crinkled long veil. Placing her mother's framed photograph of Errol Flynn on the dresser, her small, gnarled hands reached for the veil as if to smooth it vainly. A small music box was situated nearby. Alma opened the box to a yellowed ballerina, whose tutu had half disintegrated with age. The ballerina began turning herself around and around in a broken, uneven pirouette to a melancholy tune, and as Alma stared in the mirror to the sad little song, she imagined herself beautiful, young. She smiled, transfixed by the music and at her own reflection with the veil, the ugly hands stroking the veil alluringly as she stood next to the photo of Mr. Flynn, beloved by both mother and daughter, and Alma was happy within her phantom delusion. Suddenly, the door opened. "What on earth are you doing in here?" Viola demanded, breaking Alma's reverie in one embarrassing instant. "Are you smoking in here? You crack nut! You'll catch the drapes on fire! Alma! Alma! You know you're not to smoke indoors!" cried Viola in exasperation and anger as she flustered her way into the room and snatched Alma's smoldering pipe, which indeed could have caught the drapes on fire. Viola whipped the drapes the rest of the way open to inspect for any stray embers. Dust exploded into the room from the disturbed drapes. Alma said nothing, but tossed the veil off her head in order to hide it in vain. Viola spied the picture of Errol Flynn and assessed the situation critically. "Alma, by our Heavenly Father, you are a crack nut. I ought to have you committed," Viola cried in her fear and frustration. Alma stood staring back and said nothing. Alma had believed that Viola would not find her here, but now some of her secrets had been exposed. Alma would have to preserve her love for Mr. Flynn in some other way. A few evenings later, the sisters were enjoying a dinner with a little homemade cherry wine. The wine always made them chatty, and then they were fairly amiable toward one another. Alma could not ignore the secret joy bubbling up in her and finally blurted out to Viola, "I have an announcement. I have a confession I have to make. Mr. Flynn's hand I'm soon to take. I hope you'll be happy for me, you see, for Mr. Flynn's bride I'm soon to be." "What are you speaking of, sister?" Viola, stunned, froze with her soup spoon in midair. "What are you speaking of, sister?" she asked.
Do you really believe that you're engaged to Mr. Errol Flynn? I am, and you will see Mr. Flynn's to marry me, Alma protested. Alma, Mr. Errol Flynn has been dead for nearly 30 years. Oh, Alma, you are a cracknut, Alma, a cracknut.
Viola spouted in fear, exasperation, and anger. Surely her sister had lost her mind completely.
I'm seriously going to have to look into having you committed, she announced,
as she rose from the table, no longer hungry. Alma, for her part, remained seated, staring into her soup, trying to come to terms with the news that Errol Flynn was dead. Later that evening, as Viola sat at her dressing table, brushing her hair at vanity, she mused about Alma, a bit panicky.
What am I going to do about Alma? She agonized as she brushed. She could have burned down the house. God knows how many times she's been smoking upstairs, and now she believes she's going to marry Errol Flynn? Why do I have to deal with this? She's lost her mind. Oh, why did Mother and Father leave me to take care of her? My life is an anguish of burdens, truly. Anyone knows that Mr. Errol Flynn would have wanted to marry me. Oh, what will I do?
Alma was quiet for the next few days. She was accustomed to hearing that she was to be committed and that she was a cracknut. She had heard it all of her life. It occurred to her that it might be nice to be away from Viola for a while, even if it was in a sanitarium, but she would miss the chickens. Alma adjusted fairly quickly to the notion that Mr. Errol Flynn had passed. It was her own fault for not knowing, really, she decided. She really should read the papers more. She did grieve, though, and grieve deeply she did. It seemed the air had gone out of everything. The chickens who used to amuse her no longer did. The smells of sage and peppermint in her crafting cottage no longer brought her joy. The shiny ribbons of lavender, pink, and white that she used to intertwine in the twigs and sticks of her baskets no longer captured her fascination. Alma took to napping more and more. Mr. Flynn had been such a secret thrill, a private thing not shared with Viola, but who Viola had taken away with her words. Alma needed a muse, a love to fill the void that remained, to buffer her from the daily force of her sister, from the weak pulse that was the pointlessness of her life. The gravity of it all sapped what vitality she did have and made her sleepy. As she lay in the rooms for naps in the following days, dust motes dancing in the light from second and third story windows, sunlight shining on the wooden curves and beams of the furniture, she allowed the house to comfort her. Her eyes widened to take in the quiet, the dust, the wood, the shadows and light during those times. Clocks ticked away like melancholy seducers, and Alma could forget that she was an old woman as she lay there, without the world, the mirrors, or her sister to remind her that she was a foolish old woman. She was still a teen, a child at heart. She yearned like a teenager and dreamed like a child. How lovely it was to look at the strong lines of the windows of the house, the crown moldings of the rooms, the calm, smooth strength of the ceilings over her. And then it dawned on her. The house. The house. The house was speaking to her, whispering carefully words of love. Alma, you're mine. You belong with me, dear. You're mine. And suddenly came the swelling realization. The house loved her truly, permanently, safely, and with strength, like a husband. Just as the children had said, "If you love your old house so much, why don't you marry it?" she would. She loved the house. She would marry the house. End of part 4.